Okay. Hopefully this is recording properly. Thought I'd give everyone a new, big, exciting update. If you already haven't seen the Discord, the LinkedIn, the Twitter, or whatever media channels it's on. Effectively, wrapping up the end of Q2, we did an open source pilot everyone may be aware of. At first, it started off this point of view that how do you measure if Cardano is truly open source, i.e. can a community member get a code change directly into core mainnet? But we realized that that's not the most singular best bullet point to prove open source, especially when you're looking at other foundations like Linux, Hyperledger, what effectively makes them open source. So what we did was compile a 14, I guess you could call them red flags or situation analysis, that evaluates when a new contributor or maintainer or whoever it is on that open source project, how they come in, effectively go through these different situations, and then this process allows them to evaluate how the infrastructure of that project was set up to effectively collate an open source ecosystem or environment. This list is put together with best practices from Hyperledger, Apache, CNCF, and Bitergia. They're kind of my expert council that I consult with quite a bit. So shout out to y'all, especially to Hart, Jurg, Diane, and Salona. All your contributions are greatly appreciated for this piece. But we finally do have our results. We did this analysis based off Cardano addresses, Cardano CLI, and consensus. And this is completely from a non-biased point of view. There's no one from Intersect or IOG that were doing these evaluations. We actually brought in some people who are currently maintainers or suppliers who can make changes directly to CoreNet already, which is Tweeg. And then we brought in Drip Drops, Adam Dean's my guinea pig there, to actually help address the situation with Cardano addresses not having a maintainer, and working between 3 different founding entities altogether, where you have CF, IOG, and then Intersect, and how you put those together. So we went through that whole assessment piece, and we now have the results, and I will do the grand reveal. But effectively, I'll walk through how we put it together before I get to the nitty-gritty, actually. Everyone should be able to see this. I can increase probably do 170, just so everyone can see this better. So I'm calling this a true open source maturity pilot because this was put together based off those situations that you expect to see in an open source environment. Just to briefly go over, this is a 14-point scale, evaluates core Cardano's open source performance. And the areas we focused on were, these are the red flags, I guess you could say, or situations you come across, and it's just a simple pass-fail on whether you addressed it or not. But we have limited contributor engagement, inefficient code contribution process, unclear governance decision-making, lack of diversity in contributions, communication channel ineffectiveness, bug bounty program underutilization, documentation fragmentation, ineffective recognition system, lack of clarity in the governance model, a quality assurance oversight, ineffective community meetings, unclear collaborative roadmap, lack of user feedback integration, and inadequate education and training. Each of these really highlights that if you are well-rounded from all of these, you can effectively say you are open source. If you have something to address all these that we went through, was each maintainer is asked a series of questions about their experience based on the 14-point criteria listed above. These questions were collected via a Google survey, which corresponds to a Google sheet, and I'll go through that sheet later. But it also goes into measurement criteria, i.e. a pass-fail piece associated to each of the categories, and then gives you an overall grade sum average based on those questions related to the section or the 14 points themselves. And then that cumulative score is just weighed against a 50% pass-fail grade. And then each tally is collated. The sums are averaged overall into a general summary grade for all repos evaluated, and it calculates a pass rate. And that pass rate is what has to be higher than the 50% to do a pass or fail, but it also correlates to a letter grade to effectively rate that open source practice. The general observations we have from this is that the process has established a baseline for Cardano to improve its open source practice and be rated by the community it's trying to foster, whether it is truly open source or not. And although Cardano passed, that's a giveaway, we did pass this assessment, there's much more room for improvement, and the assessment can be further refined for stronger evaluations if we want to go to that level. I.e., in the future, instead of a 50% pass-fail, we could do a 75% or be more aggressive. This is completely subject to the open source committee and how we want to do that. But the overall assessment results, I tied in the letter grade based on where the pass rate percentage came in. And I tallied all the categories together, and we came in at a 60% effectively, which overall gave us a passing grade. And this is to highlight that, yes, Cardano is open source, but when you're talking about a true open source environment, Cardano has not been always effectively open source. And since Intersect came in and over the 6 months, I have to say for us to be at a 60% now truly shows the impact that we've had on these general repos. Now, mind you, this is a small selection of just 4 core repos. I plan to expand this across the whole once we actually get diversified maintainers to get that non-biased point of view again and do the assessment across the board. But this effectively shows that Cardano, just in those 3 instant cases of those repos, we actually have improved our open source practice. Now, mind you, too, we post the hard fork for Chang. We will actually do more implementation and correction and stuff like this to increase that pass rate. We've just been holding off to not disrupt the current workflow going on, but I am happy to see that an F has never been in our trajectory, and there's only to go up from here. And this truly shows the impact that Intersect has had on open source practice so far. But effectively, as we go through each of these areas, the engagement piece, we scored a 75%, therefore correlating to a pass. The code contribution process needs better improvement. There's a 25% overall sentiment there. The governance decision-making process, we hit the pass criteria at a 50, but obviously can improve on that. Diversity and contributions, a lot of people were contributing. All the maintainers felt that there is a good diversity of contributions there, and that can be backed up overall in Patergia, which I'll go to after this, which is our supplemental tool. The communication channels, room for improvement, but we met the pass criteria. The bug bounty program, this makes sense because there is no bug bounty program currently Intersect, so therefore it's a fail. Other open source ecosystems utilize it. I kept it in here to be fair to that model. But obviously we can rectify this and remove it in the future. I just wanted to establish our baseline. Our documentation is at a 60%, and I have to shout out to the teams, core Cardano teams, because when I was at IOG, I pushed heavy to make sure we had basic API documentation in place that wasn't there prior to the Intersect migration. But that's in place. The other cool thing, even though there's not an official recognition program or system, there is one per the projects. All the maintainers effectively thought that they were sufficiently recognized and that there was a reward in that based on itself. That's the one that actually surprised me because I thought that's an initiative we needed to hit harder. Maybe we can just reinforce it. But overall, there seems to be good sentiment that they are recognized. Something I'm happy to see is the clarity in the governance model, i.e. how people know how they correlate, who's in charge, code owners, things like that. This goes into us pushing out the adoption of the governance policy from the open source committee. Obviously, I'm seeing a good tie-in here, and I'll do a video on what that policy is later if anyone has missed it, but it is on our Gitbook page. The code review process and the community meetings, those hit the pass criteria, but there's very much room for improvement. And I think this also shows the, I guess, maturity of the governance policy in action. We're getting people to adopt that, but this is also those technical working groups holding those public meetings. Most of them have just started outside of Ouroboros Network and the Wallets team. To actually get the maintainers to meet with the core contributors and just general populace and work out those future products, etc. But this shows that it's had an impact. At least we didn't fail in those areas where we would have before. And then the collaborative roadmap, feedback integration, and education and training, they actually surprised me because they're above the 50% mark, but obviously room for improvement. I was actually worried on these three areas, especially education and training, but there seems to be sufficient levels, enough for us to pass at the moment. And then the other piece to this, I'll just briefly go through this at a high level, and then I'll get into the spreadsheet itself, which is linked above. But the use case evaluation, we basically took each of these 14 categories, evaluated it based on a use case for pass fail. And an example is the limited contributor engagement. The use case was to test the effectiveness of the onboarding process for new contributors, evaluate the clarity and accessibility of documentation, mentorship availability, and overall onboarding experience to boost contributor engagement. And then we broke that down into a given when then, so that way you better understand the experience from that point of view, which is given when a contributor has just joined the project, when they go through the onboarding process, then they should find the documentation clear and accessible, receive adequate mentorship, and have a positive onboarding experiences that encourages further engagement. The questions we asked associated to that was based on the maintainers, how would you rate your onboarding experience? The pass fail criteria was on a scale of 1 to 5. Is it 3 or higher? Was the documentation clear and accessible? That's a simple yes, no. And did you receive adequate guidance during the onboarding process? Yes, no. And as we can see, we got a 75% on that. So room for improvement, but we could make a more official onboarding standard process across all the repositories. Now, if you are on this report, if you click here, it'll actually tally you into the assessment piece. We tied into that Google survey was a bunch of submission pieces that were calculated here. So this ties you into the repository. We had 2 maintainers to give feedback for consensus. So their pieces are here. Their pass rates based on what they did it, Cardano addresses, and CLI. This fed into our repo results, which collated the multiple responses into a single entity or a single cumulative score. And then that brought us over to our cumulative pass fail. And there were 14 things. So I collated all, or some averaged all the percentages. 1400 is the benchmark. We divided that by 100, then times the multiplier. We got a 59.5, and it's 60% round up. So we hit it, even though it was right on the border. But that right there, to me, shows me the hope of the initiatives that we're doing, how Intersect has had an impact. And just to reinforce that point overall, a quick mention, this is the overall grading criteria. If anyone's curious about what the questions are, etc., I took snippets of this and put them in the assessment doc. But to reinforce the impact that we've had here, I do have to mention our good friends at Bitergia. They actually, it's our analytical tool. We're trying to establish a strategic partnership with them and help the Cardano community understand what good projects are and good metrics associated to evaluate your projects. There's a whole bunch of stuff on open source with this, and I will have more YouTube recordings on that, as well as more engagement. Next week is kind of the, I guess, our launch of being involved in all this detail. But just to show everything, these are filters based on here. This screen is only set up to the 27 core repositories. You can list them here. These are the project level. I put a lot of repos associated with each of these, but they are associated with the Meta project, Core Cardano, and then GovTool. This is everything under Intersect's umbrella. And I put it to the filter of the last 1 year. And you can see that before Intersect, essentially we're at 64% by IOG. There's a couple from Twig, 12%, 7.72, etc. But as we go and just do the last 90 days, that umbrella has shrunk quite a bit, where you actually now have 15% coming from Twig, more from Binary Apps. This is the GovTool piece, well-typed, Certo Technology, etc. And IOG is down to 56%. So not that we are taking the work away from anyone, but we are trying to build that diversity model where there are more contributions to help build this bigger pie. This is effectively how you open source your tech and truly measure that. The assessment was supposed to set a baseline, so that way this gives the community a way to evaluate us and their experiences, and it makes us beholden to their points of view. So as we effectively execute our open source strategy, which is to bring in two maintainers per Cardano repository, we're diversifying that and bringing the community tie-in, but keeping also the source engineers. That way you have that interaction bridge. Of course, these projects can bring on more. That is just our baseline to hit before the end of Q4. And this is just showing the impact of that overall. So So, of course, I X'd out in the middle of the recording, so just add this to the end of it. But we have made an impact. All our efforts are actually having a measurable impact now, and it's only to go up from here. We would have been in that bad category had we not been doing all this stuff over the last 6 months. But this effectively allows the community to tell us how we're truly open source, how other models do it, and there's better areas to assess us about how other foundations specifically do it that we can do in the future. But they all agreed that this is a good baseline. And if we can hit this, we can actually say we are open source and actually mean it, not just gloating that we have code on GitHub or that we do some interactions here and there. This is a true and definable way to say you are open source. So just want to again say thank you to all my expert council, the community, and my guinea pigs for all this process, and the open source committee. And today is the 8th. We will actually have the open source committee call and the open source office hours this Thursday and Friday. Just keep it live on the Discord if you want to jump in, ask questions associated with this. Happy to talk to it. Thank y'all.